When I was a kid, I noticed something interesting happening to the playgrounds in my neighborhood. To put it bluntly, they got lame. Seemingly overnight, all of the best playgrounds suddenly went from looking like this to looking like this. Interesting, unique wooden playgrounds were suddenly torn down and replaced with these boring, safe cookie-cutter layouts. When I decided to explore the disappearance of cool playgrounds online, I discovered that this was not a phenomenon unique to my neighborhood, but to the neighborhoods of kids in my generation all across North America. But if you're a little bit older than me, you might have also noticed something similar happening during your childhood. Except in your case, maybe the playground being torn down looked something like this, or even this. The reason cited for these changes was often safety. More durable materials, less hard surfaces, or things for kids to fall off of. But are these safer playgrounds really better for children? Or has our quest to protect kids caused us to lose something along the way? Today we're going to be taking a look at the history of playgrounds, learn why they were built in the first place, explore some terrifying early play equipment, and see if a little pinch of danger might be exactly what we need to get kids outside again. During the Industrial Revolution, North America would see a huge wave of people moving into urbanized areas. But this sudden population growth would result in many of these new migrants ending up in slums, which, if you know anything about the Victorian era, were one of the last places in history you would ever want to be. The conditions in these slums were downright inhumane. They were dirty, overcrowded, and filled with crime, with many of their residents living far below the poverty line. Children who were growing up in these places didn't have anywhere to play. In fact, some cities like New York actually had laws that banned kids from playing in the street altogether. But growing concerns about the increasing number of children living below the poverty line caused many people to fear that if they weren't given a proper place to play, then they would instead turn to a life of crime. The first person to come up with the idea for a public play space just for kids was Friedrich Froebel, an educator from Germany who created what he called the sand garden, or as we know it today, a sandbox. Froebel believed that providing kids with a stimulating environment where they could play with natural materials like sand was integral for their development, and that these sand gardens gave them the opportunity for exploration and learning. This idea would soon be adapted all throughout Germany, before it eventually made its way to North America and evolved into playgrounds, one of the first of which opened in 1887 in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. Playgrounds would become hugely popular among large cities, and their benefits were apparent. Not only did they keep kids out of the dangerous city streets, but they were seen as a place for building good moral citizens. Playgrounds were able to teach children teamwork, risk aversion, social skills, and they helped integrate the children of immigrants into American society. The idea was so successful that even New York, previously the no playing allowed city, mandated in 1895 that every future schoolhouse had to be built with a playground. This widespread adoption of playgrounds would eventually lead to the creation of the Playground Association of America, whose founding tenets included promoting safe environments in order to foster children's mental, physical, and moral well-being. And how did they plan to do that? Well, let's take a look at the playgrounds themselves. The biggest difference with early playgrounds is that they were not spaces for free play. While today a kid can just go to a public park and have fun, early playgrounds were treated more like a school gym class. Some sections were segregated by gender, and select locations also included additional facilities like bathrooms, community gardens, and swimming pools. Each playground would be equipped with an attendant, who would organize games for the kids that focused on exercise and teamwork. These attendants were integral for ensuring that playgrounds achieved their desired function of teaching kids to be good members of society. The first playgrounds included many of the structures that we're familiar with today, only less regulated and considerably more dangerous. Slides could be steep, and often only had low walls to prevent you from falling off, if they had any walls at all. They were also metal, which made using one in the summer feel like you were descending directly into the burning depths of hell. Swings were often set on a high frame, which meant that you could get some serious height if you were committed enough, so long as you didn't mind flying off or hitting your head on the nearby play structures. They also weren't confined to the traditional model, and featured all kinds of interesting variations. Then there were the jungle gyms, which first took their name very literally and were designed to just be an outdoor gymnasium. These structures were usually made of wood or metal, and were an impressive sight to behold, often acting as the centerpiece of their park. Here, kids could climb, hang, or swing to their heart's content, just as long as they didn't mind falling 20 feet to the hard ground below. Some of them also included these things, called sliding poles, which were basically a slide without the slide part, and you would just go down with your legs wrapped around the outside. Some of them were also made of wood, so you can only imagine the level of splinters that you were risking. Honestly, I'm not sure if that's better or worse than the metal slide. Another staple of early playgrounds were spinners and merry-go-rounds. Unlike their modern variants, these contraptions had no safety features to limit their speed, meaning that not only did they go fast, but they could launch you clear across the playground if you weren't holding on tight enough, not to mention the extra casualties if you hit other children. But the most notorious piece of playground equipment by far was the giant stride. This was a type of spinner that was built with a singular pole that was topped with a big wheel with ropes hanging off of it. Kids would hold onto these ropes and then run around the pole as the wheel spun, eventually causing themselves to be lifted into the air by the centrifugal force. Now, I'm not gonna lie, these look super fun, but they were also really dangerous. Children losing their grip and flying off was a common occurrence, and some versions had metal handles, which could then whip around and hit the other children riding. And of course, if another kid isn't paying attention and walks too close to the structure when it's in motion, then they could end up getting kicked in the face. And all of these problems were even worse with the more do-it-yourself varieties that some playgrounds used, which could be built as tall as you wanted. These dangers would cause the giant stride to be one of the first pieces of playground equipment removed for safety reasons. But while other structures like the merry-go-round would receive modifications in order to hang around a little longer, as concerns about child safety began to rise, their days were also numbered. The onset of World War II would signal the end for many of the original playgrounds. With resources needed for the war effort, many metal play structures would be scrapped, playground attendants were slowly phased out, and the lack of manpower to maintain public parks eventually led to many of these early playgrounds deteriorating. As for their European counterparts, most would be destroyed by bombings during the war. But from the ashes would soon rise a new type of playground, one that would be quite literally built on the remains of old. With nowhere else to go, kids started playing in the ruins of bomb sites, climbing and exploring the remains of their destroyed cities. This idea would eventually be adapted into the adventure playground, a type of playground that emphasized allowing children to manipulate their environment. These playgrounds used natural materials, scraps, and junk, and were designed to have as many free-moving pieces as possible. Some major aspects of adventure playgrounds could include tires, tree trunks, building materials and tools, and a variety of found objects. More traditional playgrounds would also change during this time. In the 50s and 60s, there would be a rise in the popularity of novelty playgrounds, ones that had their play structures modeled after a specific theme. These playgrounds still included many of the original staples, but the theming provided an extra level of excitement and visual intrigue. Thanks to improvements in manufacturing, standardized playground equipment would also be available, which allowed for more elaborate designs than earlier pieces that had to be built from a kit IKEA style. But while playgrounds were getting more interesting, there were also rising concerns about safety. Accidents had always happened, but in the early days, the presence of supervisors made parents feel more confident that their kids were in a safe place. Although some dangerous elements of playgrounds were phased out, changing social attitudes and several lawsuits in the 1970s would eventually lead to the standardization of playgrounds in North America, and a big change in the industry going forward. The 1980s would see the removal of many play elements that were deemed hazardous, like hard surfaces, tall climbing structures, and many classic pieces of play equipment. New playgrounds were now being built with safety as a priority, rounded edges, softer materials, and smaller overall playgrounds, with plenty of bars to keep kids from hanging off the structures or from falling. As for the old playgrounds, many would meet their demise during this time, either for safety reasons or simply because communities were looking to modernize their public parks. But this change in priority didn't mean that there weren't still interesting playgrounds being made. It was during this new safety era in the 80s and 90s that many of the beloved wooden playgrounds would be built, including the ones designed by Leathers and Associates, which some of you might recognize by their really cool castle playgrounds, like the one in Toronto's High Park, which was my childhood favorite. But unfortunately, as child safety initiatives became more extreme in the early 2000s, even these wooden playgrounds were considered too old and dangerous. Parents made the argument that they kept children too hidden from view, and there was a risk for splinters or insects making their homes inside the structure. Once again, this push for safety would see the removal of many playgrounds from the 80s and 90s, and their replacements becoming even more sterile and boring. But the rise of ultra-safe playgrounds came with a whole set of new problems. Their design philosophy often focused around ensuring that even the youngest child potentially using the structure would be safe. This meant even shorter heights, even more guardrails, and even less moving elements. But while these new measures supposedly reduced the risk of injury in young children, at the same time it ended up isolating the older ones. But come here, come here. Let me tell you something. The children, they yearn for dangerous playgrounds. Yeah, a merry-go-round might be able to launch you 6 feet across the pavement, but they're fun! I remember when I was around 8 years old, my family went on a vacation to the Dominican Republic, and the resort there had this really old park with a merry-go-round. Now, I had never encountered one in real life before, and I spent every second that I could spinning on that thing. And you know what? No one got hurt, and I'm guessing that in most of your childhoods, no one got seriously hurt either. In fact, more recent studies have actually shown that North American playgrounds might be too safe. Children have a natural inclination towards risky play. Risk-taking activities like climbing a really tall jungle gym can help brain development and improve self-confidence and risk management skills later in life. Some critics have even suggested that these overly safe playgrounds actually cause kids to be more fearful of things like heights and lead to increased anxiety levels. According to Dr. Sandsetter at the Norwegian University for Science and Technology, engaging in risky play mirrors some cognitive behavioral therapy techniques that are used to treat anxiety. And on top of all that, there isn't any clear evidence that these safer playgrounds actually reduce the number of injuries. Little kids are always going to find some way to hurt themselves, whether that's falling off a slide or just eating wood chips. But all hope is not lost. In recent years, there have been several groups that have sought to improve playground quality in North America. Companies like Compan, for example, are building innovative playgrounds that focus on giving kids the physical and mental development that they need. And they even brought back the spinny things! And the sliding poles! And they're not alone. There are plenty of other amazing people out there that are trying to create both a safe and exciting environment for kids. Like this playground at the Scenic Caves in Blue Mountain, Ontario, which has an old-timey jungle gym. It also has this wooden statue of Shrek, which I totally thought I imagined as a kid, but it's real, and it's important to me that you know that. There's even a few adventure playgrounds left, like the one in Berkeley, California. As less and less children are playing outside, we need good playgrounds more than ever. But thankfully, things are back on the right track, and future generations have a lot to look forward to. And there you have it, that's the history of playgrounds. Honestly, when I started this topic, I wasn't expecting it to be so in-depth, but I found it really interesting. Hopefully you did too. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more content like this, you can also subscribe to my channel, and keep up to date on all the fun history videos of the future. But for now, I bid you farewell.